we in the Western world, we really want defined boundaries. We really want to wrap our brain around well-defined boundaries. And when you come to holistic healing, there really aren't well-defined boundaries. So, when you talk about the connection of the mind, body, soul, spirit, emotions, relationships, the environment, when you talk about such a symbiotic relationship of all, there's going to be bleeding over of boundaries. And that's just a natural occurrence.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Hello, Savannah family. Welcome back to the show. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, for your time and your attention. Today, we're continuing our conversation with author Michelle S. Fondin as we dive deeper into our exploration of the chakras. Michelle explains how the Yoga Sutras and Tantric philosophy weave into our study of these energy centers. We're also going to talk about awakening Kundalini energy, Ida and Pingala nadis, and the association of Ida and Pingala with each of these 7 energy centers. So if you feel like you have a pretty strong understanding of the basics of the chakras, this podcast episode is really going to be great for you because we go much, much deeper, and I learned quite a few things myself. Before we jump in, let me remind you, leaving a review, it makes a huge difference. So please take a moment to do it. And if you're not sure how to leave a review here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show, you can get all the instructions on how to do that at savannahspirit.com/review because it's complicated. It's not the easiest, most intuitive thing to do. If you want to go deeper with all this work Michelle and I are talking about, a great thing to do is to do some crystal healing with your chakras. This is something I personally love, and SavannahSpirit.com has an incredible range of crystals that you can purchase. There's a chakra healing kit, and one of the things I wanted to feature today was their rose quartz, because Michelle talks about how she wore some rose quartz in her bra to help balance her heart chakra, and I thought it was a really lovely idea. And at SavannahSpirit.com, we actually have rose quartz mini hearts. There's a set of 4 of those. We have rose quartz that you can bathe with. We have a beautiful rose quartz heart pendant, which would be so appropriate to have right over that heart chakra area. So check all of those out at SavannahSpirit.com. And remember, you can use that code podcast30 for 30% off. All right, now let's go deeper into our exploration of the chakras. So continuing our conversation with Michelle, I'm a huge fan of the Yoga Sutras. I teach them as part of yoga teacher training. So many people love the sutras, but there's often a disconnect where it's like, how does that text tie into everything we've learned about the chakras and the subtle body? And I know this is something that you address right in the introduction of your book. So I'd love for you to share that with us.
Yes, of course. So the Yoga Sutras are such a beautiful practice, the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, and they're really the foundational texts of yoga philosophy. And you say you teach them in yoga teacher training. Well, I think most teachers learn them on a very superficial level, but then they have a hard time integrating them into life, into daily life, when really it's such a beautiful practice. So it's beautiful how they all tie in together. So we talked about the Ayurvedic doshas, and we talked about the chakras, and they all weave together with the Yoga Sutras, which are really based on the 3 gunas, which are the psychic forces of the mind. And the 3 gunas are sattva, rajas, and tamas. And this all comes from the subtle body. So the subtle body is the mind, the intellect, and the ego. And it's how our minds just go crazy, and that's why it's so darn hard to meditate, right? And according to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, they say that it's our path to self-realization, which is really going beyond the self, which is the lower self, the ego self. And it's not denying it, because we need our ego to operate in this world. If we didn't have our ego, we couldn't go get a spouse. house, because you have to convince that person that you're the one, you're better than anybody else. So you need that ego. But when we're talking about moving into self-healing and moving into those higher states, we really need to be able to go beyond the ego into the more spiritual self. So sattva is this psychic energy that is balanced, pure, peaceful, alert, clear-minded. And just think of it as being just like pure light, just purity. Purity is a great word for sattva. Then we move into the second psychic energy, which is called rajas. And rajas is moving. It's this active energy, and it's always changing. And then we move into tamas, which is inertia, decay, heaviness, and dullness. Think of like darkness or obstruction. And even like when something is just destroyed, that destructive force is tamas, or it's tamasic energy. So we have these three qualities of nature, or prakriti, which is our true nature, and they're all necessary in our lives. And the way they work is because, remember, we talked about the 5 elements of space, air, fire, water, and earth. Well, those are also energies. So we're dealing with these 5 great elements called the Mahabhutas, and we're dealing with these 3 psychic sources, which are called the Gunas. And then we're dealing with these doshas and the chakras, and then they all interweave together. For example, the solar plexus energy would be rajasic energy, right? That moving, active energy, the get up and go attitude, to go up and move and do something. And then when I said sattva is purity, when you think of a halo above somebody's head in that crown chakra, that beautiful white light, that would be that sattvic, that pure energy. And then tamas, which is the inertia or the time to sleep, would be the more base chakra, the second chakra even. For example, a woman who is making a baby needs to get loads of rest. And if she doesn't get rest, she's going to have a hard time making that baby, or she might experience some problems. But that tamasic or slower energy is really necessary when that woman is making that baby, because she needs to rest and slow down. So do you see how these psychic forces all interact with other energies?
I do. And I think people might be curious about what you mean by psychic forces or psychic energies. So, and I know I don't want you to have to go super deep into tantric philosophy, although I would love us to, but maybe you want to tell them a little bit more about what you mean by that, and maybe a little bit about the Mahabhutas as well.
Oh, yeah, sure. So the psychic energy is really, when we talk about, let's talk about the subtle body. As I mentioned, the subtle body, you may not have any idea what that means. So we have these 3 bodies, if you will. So there's our physical body. You all know what the physical body is, but it's combined of our environment and then our body, which is this thing of flesh and bones. And it's all, and the energy body, which is prana, which is the life force. When we talk about the chakras, we're talking about that energy body. Then we move into the subtle body, which is the mind, the intellect, and the ego. And when we talk about psychic forces, we're talking about something that we can't wrap our hands around, right? So these are very subtle energies that if you look for the mind, you can't find the mind, but you know it's there, because when you sit down to try to meditate, as I mentioned, the mind just comes up with all these reasons as to why you shouldn't be sitting there meditating. So that's the mind. And then the intellect is our area of discernment. So what's right and what's wrong. And then the ego, we all know what the ego is. It's the 2-year-old in all of us, right? What's yours is mine and what's mine is mine. So that's the area of the subtle body. So these gunas really sit in the realm of that subtle body in there. And that is what we tend to have to overcome. So that's when we talk about the psychic forces, we're really more talking about those subtle energies of the subtle body.
Got it. And I know you mentioned that the solar plexus chakra, naturally that evokes and it has a more rajasic energy. But is our goal with all the chakras to be in a state of sattva or balance, or not so much? Yeah,
well, basically, when we look at the goal of the Yoga Sutras, which is really self-realization, right? And when I mentioned the little s self versus the bigger s self, which is our more spiritual nature, and it's not about always being in sattvic energy. As I mentioned, you can have too little or too much of anything. The ultimate goal of the yogi, of course, is to transcend the lower ego-based self or the physical self for the transcendent higher self, very few people that have walked this planet have actually attained that specific goal. But the idea when I teach about the Yoga Sutras and I teach about overcoming or transcending the subtle body and even the physical body and moving into the causal body, which is our more spiritual side, I like to say that it's more about bringing awareness to every aspect of who you are so that you can freely choose. The problem with not having self-realization is having those handcuffs or the shackles of non-choice, meaning that you're so confined by the boundaries of the lower energies, the lower chakras, or the other gunas, the tamasic and rajasic energies, that you feel that you don't have a choice to transcend them. But once you reach a more enlightened state or that sattvic state, then you have the choice. And you say, I think today I'm going to live in ego consciousness because that's where I'm at today. But you do it with awareness. And when you do it with awareness, you're not stuck there.
Got it. So it's really about coming into a sattvic state so we can, and I mean, do we have to talk a little bit about Kundalini energy now and moving like up the chakras? I know, I'm just like, I want to know about everything. So, because I think that's another question people have is if my chakras are blocked, or if one is in excess, or one is deficient, or one has too much rajasic energy, or is too tamastic, or something like that. Does it mean that that serpentine Kundalini energy at the base of the spine can't climb up for Shiva to meet with, or Shakti to meet with Shiva and all of those things?
Yes. So to define, because you just mentioned a bunch of vocabulary that I'm not certain that everybody knows.
Yeah, so please.
So let's, for both of us and the audience, let's just go ahead and kind of go through. So according to Tantric texts, we have circulatory channels in the body. So we have about 72,000 of these circulatory channels called nadis, which transport the prana or the vital force energy. And there are 3 of the main nadis, which are these circulatory channels that align the spine. There is the Ida nadi, which is the left side, and that's the lunar energy. Then there's the Pingala nadi, which is the more solar. And then there's the Sushumna nadi, which is the energy that starts at the base of the spine, at the first chakra, and moves up to the crown. Actually, yeah, it moves up to the crown of the head. And then you talked about the Kundalini Shakti, or the creative energy. And it actually sits like a serpent coiled up in 3 rings, waiting to move up to the crown of the head, to awaken, as you mentioned, to awaken those chakras, to awaken that Kundalini force and that Kundalini energy. But meanwhile, the Ida and Pingala nadis, they alternate and they move up through to the 6th chakra, the third eye chakra. So they're alternating in energy. And so, for example, the base of the spine, the root chakra, is a more solar energy. And then we move into the 2nd chakra, which is a more feminine or lunar energy. And then they alternate. They alternate all the way up through to the 6th chakra, where the 6th chakra, the third eye, it actually transcends this alternance in feminine, masculine, or solar and lunar energies. And the question that you asked was, let's suppose you have a huge blockage in your 3rd chakra. Let's say that you were raised by alcoholic parents. You were a people pleaser growing up. As an adult, you became a people pleaser. You feel afraid to say anything or be who you really truly are. And so you kind of shrink back when it comes to expressing yourself and moving forward in life because you haven't learned to assert yourself well. And so having that blockage in the 3rd chakra, will it inhibit you from experiencing that full Kundalini energy of the upper chakras because you have that blockage? That's probably something you need to work through. And yes, that can inhibit you from experiencing those higher states of being. It doesn't mean it's impossible. Let's take that example of having the alcoholic parents. many people can do that by, for example, attending meetings like Al-Anon or going to therapy to overcome the effects of having parents who were addicted and who maybe abused you verbally and physically, and you weren't able to express yourself and move out forward into the world. So that's an example of how it can be blocked and that energy can't be moved up because of that.
Thanks. That's a great example. And I appreciate you really painting such a clear picture. It was really lovely of all these different terms. I have a question for you. This has been described to me differently with different teachers I've studied with. So I'm curious on your opinion, because this always gets asked every time I teach this. People are always curious. I mean, are Ida and Pingala actually crisscrossing at each chakra, or do they run alongside Sushumna Nadi on either side? I think that's something
I've learned that they've crisscrossed.
Interesting. I've learned both ways, and I've always been fascinated. I'm always interested to ask people because I have heard both ways, and I think it was really interesting too when you talked through the different chakras leaning more Pingala or more Ida. Is that sort of what you implied? I didn't want to. So can you walk us through those? Because that's really interesting, and I don't know if I've heard that much about that. So you were saying the root chakra more Pingala. So that means sacral chakra more, and again, we're using masculine, feminine here as representative of Ida and Pingala. So Ida, solar plexus chakra, obviously. Pingala, Anahata would be Ida, throat, Pingala, third eye, Ida, and then Sahasrara.
Actually, the third eye, it transcends.
We're transcending at that point. Okay.
We're merging into, yes. So I know it's confusing, but when we get to the third eye, it merges into oneness already.
Before the crown chakra. Interesting. Okay.
Because it's depending on the texts that you read about the 6th and the 7th chakras, they all say that the center of intuition is the beginning of that transcendence. It's the merging into oneness. And so the word ajna means to go beyond. So ajna meaning go beyond, you're already going beyond the forces of the opposition of the masculine, feminine, the yin, the yang. So it's already merging into the oneness. And that's why people have the clairvoyance and psychic visions at that point. So someone who is very clairvoyant, who has the psychic visions, it's through that third eye chakra. So that's the moving beyond. Someone who's bound and confined by the opposition of yin yang, by the opposition of these, by these gunas that hold us tightly.
And I wanted to ask you how the gunas play into what we just talked about. If they do, does it mean that the root chakra has a more tamastic energy while
actually tamas works with, they don't alternate.
They don't alternate. Yeah, that was going to be my next question.
Feminine. No. They don't alternate like masculine, feminine. They work more like the doshas work. Like, for example, the first and second chakras are more tied to the kapha dosha, and that's just because of the elements that correspond to those chakras. Does that make sense? So the first chakra is earth, the second chakra is water, and kapha is what's kapha, water and earth. So which also means that pitta is also affected by that second chakra. So, it's not exactly clear cut. I know with Ida and Pingala, it's a little more clear because when we talk about the Ida nadi being connected, for example, to the second chakra, creativity and sexual center, that makes so much sense because feminine, lunar, passive, sexual, creative, that's all one. It's a symbiosis of one thing because the womb literally sits in the second chakra. So that makes total sense. And then the third chakra being the masculine, the Pingala, makes sense too, because the forward moving, penetrating energy of the sun represents that masculine warrior, go out and get 'em energy that embodies nadi. So it makes sense. With the doshas and the gunas, it's a little less clear as far as they don't alternate.
Right. And I get this question all the time, so I'm curious to see how you will answer it, because people ask me this a lot, especially in trainings and whatnot. They get confused about the gunas as compared to the doshas, right? And how are these playing in different realms?
Well, the doshas, you've got to think that the doshas are more physical in nature, so more sitting in the exact prakriti of the person. So the nature
of an individual. Yeah.
Yeah, the individual. So it's of the individual's makeup. Whereas I mentioned the gunas are more the psychic forces. So I guess within the realm of the mind more than, and they're just different. I think there are different ways of describing similar qualities that tend to overlap. So one thing that I think practitioners of yoga, Ayurveda, chakra energy healing have a difficult time with, when you start to learn more of these Eastern philosophical texts, is that we in the Western world, we really want defined boundaries. We really want to wrap our brain around well-defined boundaries. And when you come to holistic healing, there really aren't well-defined boundaries. So, when you talk about the connection of the mind, body, soul, spirit, emotions, relationships, the environment, when you talk about such a symbiotic relationship of all, there's going to be bleeding over of boundaries. And that's just a natural occurrence. So sometimes, yes, it's going to look like, for example, when we talk about healing a dosha through the chakras, being that, for example, let's take that second chakra example of water element. Yes, the kapha dosha can be balanced through that second chakra, but yes, pitta can also be balanced through that second chakra because of that watery element. So as you see, like the lines are blurred a little bit, but that doesn't make it less special. It just makes it like you might need a specialist, an Ayurvedic specialist to help you with that, or you might need an energetic healer to help you get into the more precise aspects of healing.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, and I tell that to people too. We want to put everything in like a perfect box with a bow, and it's like the Container Store. I love it so much. But I mean, when we're talking about Tantra and the Yoga Sutras and the chakras and how this all bleeds together, unfortunately, we're not able to compartmentalize as much as we might like. One thing you said in episode 1 that I wanted to make sure to follow up and ask you about, which I thought was really interesting, was you were saying how the male sex organ is in the root chakra, but for the female, it's in the second chakra. Was that correct?
And it's okay. So that's what I have read. And it's interesting because, like I said, a lot of authors or interpreters, I guess, of Tantra have different interpretations. And like I said, it's those weirdly defined boundaries. So that being said, I've heard that these sex organs, period, are in the first chakra, which I totally don't agree with. And I've heard that the sex organs, period, are in the second chakra, which I totally don't agree with, because the perineum, the area of the perineum, is the first chakra. The bladder is the first chakra, but the men's sex organ, the scrotum, sits there in the root chakra. So I am sorry, anatomically speaking, that's where it is. However, the flow of semen, for example, is a second chakra issue. So for example, a man who might have premature ejaculation or have low sperm count, the ejaculation quality, if you will, is a second chakra quality. So like I said, it's not clearly defined boundaries, because when we're speaking in Ayurveda, and we talk about sexual fluids, for example, that's a more second chakra issue. So it's like I said, there aren't clearly defined boundaries, but you can look at it. If you're having fertility issues as a woman, for example, it's always a second chakra issue.
No, and I asked you about this because I thought it was so interesting, because just like you, I've heard different things, and you were one of the first people I had talked to in a context like this who like divided it up, male sex organ and female. So I just wanted to touch back on that because people who are really into this, they're going to want to know too. And I love that you're sharing it. Before we let you go, I think I just want to ask you about how people can balance these energy centers at home and sort of what you suggest. Obviously, they can get your book. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, and there's lots of yoga asanas, pranayama, daily things we can do, like taking break between our different activities that we've talked about. But on a more energetic level, I mean, I know people have put crystals on the different chakras, right? Or people hear about putting their hands on the chakras, or, there's a lot of just those types of things that we can do. And I'd love for you to tell us more about that.
Sure. So, like, for example, there are, in the book I do mention too, there are crystals that correspond to each of the chakras. There are the colors that correspond to each of the chakras. And it might seem really trivial, but crystals, first of all, are energy that come from the earth. You don't have to believe in a crystal to make it work for you. Like, for example, the rose quartz, which is traditional for opening up the heart chakra. They sell rose quartz crystals in heart shape. And it was recommended to me by someone who was really good at energy healing to wear a rose quartz crystal inside my bra on the left side. So you can do things like that. You can carry around the crystals that correspond to it. You can wear them as jewelry. You can wear, if you have an intention to balance a specific chakra, you can wear the colors of that chakra for that day, or I've even put up like color posters with the chakra banners in just to remind me to focus on that specific chakra.
And Michelle, correct me if I'm wrong, but just so people at home know, it's not as simple as like a crystal that's the color of the root chakra is the one that's for the root chakra, right? It's not like that. I just want to dispel that right away.
Yeah, absolutely. There are in the book, I do list the specific crystals that help you balance that each of the specific chakras, just depending on what chakra it is. You can do chanting or toning, and there are mantra sounds for each of the chakras. And those are all also listed in the book. By chanting that sound, the vibrational quality of that sound will help you to balance the chakra. And I know some people feel weirded out by chanting, but honestly, close the door. Go into your closet and close the door and start chanting your chakra sound or something. Like Westerners do tend to get a little weirded out by that. So you can do that. But one thing that's just so simple that most people just don't do is place awareness to the areas of your body where you tend to be ailing on a regular basis. That is a great start. So, for example, if you have continual migraines and the migraines come behind the eyes or right in the forehead, that's indicative of the ajna or third eye chakra, sixth chakra imbalance. And, like you said, you could place your hands over that area and just bring awareness to it and just jot down and take notes as to like which parts of my body tend to get uncomfortable and where do I tend to hold on to tension. Just that awareness alone will go miles, because then once you bring awareness to that area, then you're able to do all of these other practices and just focus more clearly on which ones you do need to open.
Amazing. Michelle, thank you so much for coming on the show and nerding out with me on all things chakra. Can you tell the listeners how they can stay connected with you online, a little bit about your book, just how can they find you?
Absolutely. So my website is michellefondinauthor.com. I'm most prevalent on YouTube. My YouTube channel is Michelle Fondin Author. I post a couple of videos a day on health, wellness, and healing, especially healing of the chakras in this moment. My book is called Chakra Healing for Vibrant Energy, Exploring Your 7 Energy Centers with Mindfulness, Yoga, and Ayurveda. It is found anywhere that books are sold. And you can connect with me on social media, Michelle S. Fondin, on most Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook.
Amazing. I'll put all those links down below. Savannah listeners, let me know what you thought of this week's episode. Are you inspired to start working with the chakras on a deeper level? Maybe integrate some of this into your yoga and meditation or your journaling practice? I would love to hear from you. You can connect with me in our private Facebook group, savannahspirit.com/group. And remember, your ratings and reviews here on iTunes, even if iTunes isn't how you normally listen to the show, really make a difference. If you want to know how to leave a review, you can go to savannahspirit.com/review, because it can be hard to leave a review on iTunes. I know I've struggled with it in the past, and we have step-by-step instructions there for you. Thank you so much for listening all the way to the very end, for your support, and I'm sending you so much love from my heart to yours. Namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaeast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.